Hi, welcome back to our CwC Sumo project. This is the fourth video, the last video, and then we'll have a small video for challenges, but this is the last of the main core of the project. Currently what we have is whenever we press play, our player is able to move, and we are spawning an enemy in a random position, and if we can collect a power-up, then we have an indicator that can then knock our enemy way off for a set period of time, and then after 7 seconds this goes away. So the last thing we want to do is somewhat complicate it, but we want to make it so that we spawn enemies in waves, and so that increases. And then finally we want to make it so that our power-up spawns with that wave, because currently when we hit the power-up and it goes away, it never comes back. We want it to come back after we defeat our current set of enemies. So let's go ahead and get started. Since we're talking about spawning, we're going to be working inside of our our Sumo Spawn basically manager script. So I'm going to open that up. And currently what we have going on is we are pulling a enemy game object prefab, so a single object right now. And then we had created a float that was now using that to put into this method down here, which was returning to us a random position. So we're saying randomly, within this space on the X and Z axis, creating a new random spot, and then plugging that into our instantiate, which is putting a new thing into the world. So we're going to do something called a for loop. For loop. A for loop is a really, really handy piece of code that says, as long as to do something for so many times. So if you want to repeat something so many times. We've done something called invoke repeating, but invoke repeating was a way to repeat a method and to do it starting at a point and at a certain and how often, but we never set the amount of times that it would invoke repeating. For loop is a lot more flexible, and it just says do it for this many times. So it needs 3 parameters. It needs to know the starting number. What number do I start with? Like a counter. And then it wants to know for how long, so how many times to repeat. And then whenever it does repeat, when does it increase the counter by? It can increase it by 1, 2, 3. We can count any way we want to count. So let's start doing that. So in our start method, we are going to put for and then open up argument. And then we need to say those 3 parameters. So our starting number, we're going to use something called I. So we're going to say an integer of I. And this is just a common practice for to represent I, an integer, as a variable name. And we're going to set this equal to 0. So this first thing is saying start at 0. So currently we have none of these things. Then the next thing is how many times we want to do this, or for how long. And let's just say at the very beginning, let's say as long as I is less than 3. So this will be us trying to create 3 of these. And then the last thing we want to say is every time we make one, how many times do we increase? And we're going to say increase by 1 every time. So we will say I equals I plus 1. Now you'll see that I'm getting an error. And the reason I'm getting an error is because this is a little bit different than what we've been doing before when we've had these kind of arguments. A for loop requires, instead of commas, it requires semicolons between each of these. So it's almost like a completed line. It's like this, period, this, period, and then this. And another thing that's kind of weird is we want to make, so we're saying basically I equals, at the end of this, whatever we had initially plus 1. So 0 plus 1. And then the next time it will be 2 plus 1. And then that'll be I is less than 3, and at that point it'll be 3 and it will stop working. So we'll have 3 of these to go off of. There's another way to say this, an easier way of saying this. We did this before. Instead of saying plus 1, we can say I plus equals I. Kind of like we did earlier when we did a multiply equals sign when we did our physics gravity mod in our last game. But there's even a better way of doing this. Instead of doing this, the most common way you'll see this is plus plus. And really plus plus just means plus 1. We're going to add 1. So for as long as this is going on, I'm going to create a method, because this is like a method, a for loop is a method. Then we're going to instantiate. Command X. Put this in here. And so it should, when the game starts, it's going to do these really fast. We won't be able to see it, but basically say create one. Okay, I still need to create, I still am less than 3, so I'll put another one in. Create the second one. Still less than 3, I'll put another one in. And then it'll create the third one, and at that point it will stop making them. So let's save that. And give it a second to compile. And we should see 3 enemies now when we start the game. Boom, there you go. Great. So we know that works. Now we should make it into its own method though, because now we're starting, once you start getting like overly complicated, like you're starting getting like lines of this in your start method, it doesn't feel very good. Like we typically want to put it into its own method. So I'm going to do that just below my update. Do this. So let's call this void spawn enemy wave, because that's really what we're doing here. And I'm going to press return, open up my method brackets, my curly brackets there. And I'm just going to paste what I have here in the start inside of that, like this. So check your brackets. And then whenever the game starts, we'll just call this here, spawn enemy wave. And we have to put our argument right there. So I'm just going to delete that extra line. It makes me feel better. Let's save this, and that should basically do the same thing. See if we get the same spawning of 3 things. There you go. Great. That works fine. Okay, so that worked great. But instead of having this running just one time at the start, let's have it run 3 times and let this do the work of telling it how many times to do it. So in our void spawn enemy wave, inside of this argument, we're going to put a parameter. And we'll say that the parameter is an integer, a number, and then we'll basically say this is the number of times by which I want you to do this. And we'll call it enemies to spawn. And what we're trying to do is remove our numbers from here, just like we've done before. We want to hold those elsewhere. Enemies to spawn, and then let's replace it inside of this. Get rid of this 3. And then finally, up here is now angry because it needs to know what, if I hold over it, it says void sumo spawn enemy wave integer enemies to spawn. It wants to know what that number is. And we've said earlier we want to spawn 3 enemies when it starts. So I'm going to put a 3 inside of here. And there you go. So instead of putting numbers here like we've done before, we've made a variable in our argument, and we're holding it here. We're basically telling this to repeat 3 times, and it's just going to do it outside of the method, not hold the number in here. So let's wait a second, let it compile. And once again, we should get the same effect. We're just making the code more flexible. There you go, 3 enemies. Done. So great. So what happens if, let's do a restart wave. Let's make it so that the game restarts once we run out of enemies. So the things we would need for that is to have our enemies destroy when they get knocked off, and to keep count of the number of enemies. So let's go onto our, since we're talking about enemies, let's go into our enemy script. We know this is probably where we're going to want to do this. So how do we destroy it? Well, let's look. Our enemy currently is at a y position of 1, and if it's falling, we know that y has got to be less than its current position here. So how about we just set a number that's at least less than this, and if the enemy hits that number, then it'll destroy. So I'm going to go back here and let's put it in our update, so we always want to be checking for it. So I'm going to go to line 21, press return, and this line of script will be our if, so a conditional. If this happens, then do this. So if the transform, so we need to say what component, dot position on the y-axis is less than, let's say, -10, and we're going to make a variable for that in just a second. And I'll press return, curly brackets, destroy this game object. And instead of a -10 here, I can either put it, I'll put a variable up here. I'll just make a private, and this is an integer. I don't know, death height, something like that, and make that equal to 10. And replace this with death height, so it'll be a negative death height. Same thing. So let's save, and let's see what happens in our, we'll be watching here in our hierarchy. When the game starts, it'll create 3 enemies, and we'll see if they all die if they get knocked off. Oh, we won't be able to see it, but because I have maximized on game view. But okay, so we're going to pause for a second, and sure enough, you'll see in my hierarchy those enemies are all gone. They're no longer part of the hierarchy. They're out of there. So that means that they were destroyed. Perfect. That worked well. So we currently have no enemies in the scene. So how about we use the spawn manager to count the number of enemies? So I'm going to go back to my Sumo spawn code, and let's create an integer to hold that number. So line 8. This should be private. We don't never really need to see this. Integer, and we'll call it enemy count. That sounds good. And in the update, so I'll have it always checking to see what the enemy count is. We'll say enemy count is equal to, now this is a new line of code for us. So it looks a lot like get component. So it's going to use carrots, but we're going to find objects with an S, because there's multiple of type. And it's going to find anything called enemy. Now, we could have done this a couple of different ways, right? Oh, what did I do wrong here? Oh, I know what I did wrong, but I'll fix that in just a second. I remember. So find objects of type is a way to find anything with the name called enemy. Now, we are cloning things called enemy, so we don't actually know how many enemies we're going to have, because this will get bigger and bigger and bigger. So this will just find every type of every enemy in the scene. Now the problem, the reason why we're getting an error, is that enemy count is an integer. It's a number. And multiple objects of the same type, well, that's called an array. So I'm trying to turn an integer into an array. Well, the thing that we want is not the array, but the index, like the total number of objects in the array. How many enemies do I have? So we need to add, well, we've done this before. I wonder if you can figure it out on your own. I promise you I won't play the music, but I'll press period length. And period length now turns this into a number. How many objects of a type of enemy are there? And that's what enemy count is. Perfect. So let's think about this. If the enemy count is 0, then we want to do the spawn enemy wave. So how about in the update, let's say if enemy count is not set to 0, but we're checking to see. So we're going to say equals equals 0. Then let's spawn enemy wave. And then inside of this, we're going to put the number 1. Because that will add, well, that will basically just run it one time. So let's see if that works. So we should have a wave here. And once all the enemies are gone, which is being checked by our enemy count, then it should spawn, it should run that pattern one more time. It should put one more enemy in the scene. I'm really hoping this makes sense, what we're doing. Let me get this power up really quick. Knock, knock, knock. Get out of here. Get out of here. Oops, that guy did not beat him quickly enough. Take him out. Take him out. Get out of here. Alright, sorry, I'm out. There it is. We spawned the extra one. So that worked perfectly. We got our... We counted our enemies every update, and if the enemy count was 0, then it made one more of them. But how about this? Don't we want to increase the number of enemies every time? So let's create another integer up here. One that will hold information about how to increase a public integer, and we'll call it wave number. So basically, it's what wave are we on, and that'll be the number of enemies we have. And we'll start off with 1. So the first wave will be number 1. And we'll put, at the beginning of the game, let's just make this 1. We only spawn one enemy at the very beginning of the game. So we'll just set wave number, which is 1. We'll run it once. And then in our update, instead of the spawn wave enemy just being 1, let's increase it. And we know how to always add 1, which is take your wave number, and then to add 1 to it, it's plus plus. That should increase it every time we go up. So let's save that. So this is the heart of it right here. Spawn enemies, but then add 1 to the number of enemies, or the number of times that we run this spawn method. So let's see. So we should get 1 enemy now. Oh, I need that power up. I'm really bad at this. Oh, only got 1 that time. Let me press play. Maybe I'm just messed something up here. I'm only getting 1 when the enemy destroys. So let me think about what my error is here. Okay, so what I realized is I did this wrong. I want to increase the number first, then put that into the world. So wave number does go here, but that's not where I do the plus plus. I'm going to do it here on line 24. Wave number plus plus. Okay, so here's the reason why. Let me try to explain it again. So in our update, we're finding how many enemies we have in the game. If they're 0, so if they're all destroyed, then we're going to add 1 to the number of waves, so now we're 2, and we will run this the number of times it happened. I was trying to do it inside of here, and it's trying to add the number while it's producing them, and that just doesn't work. That should fix the problem. Alright, see if I can not get beaten down. So let me just go press play, try to run up really quick and get this power up. There you go. Knock this fool out of here. Okay. And there you go. Now I have 2. And CwC 3. There you go. Man, that feels good. Alright, the last thing we're going to do for this game is so that every time the wave occurs, we are going to add another power-up to the scene. So, where were we doing power-ups at? I'm trying to remember. Power-up was just in the world. So, if we're doing it, let's just do it in our spawn. So let's create a public game object. to hold that power up. We'll call it PowerUp prefab, because that's really what it is. We won't always use prefab when we're talking about those. And in our start, let's go ahead and make one. Let's clone one of these prefabs into the world. So instantiate. The three things we need to know are what? Well, we want to be our PowerUp prefab. We want to know where. And we've actually already got a way to do a random, generate a random position. So we can have it randomly generate in the world. So we'll just use this, comma. This is a, and we gotta make sure we put our argument there. And then we want it to have its same transform dot rotation, all that stuff. So PowerUp prefab dot transform dot rotation. Great. That should randomly spawn the PowerUp in the world. And we want this to happen not just when the game starts, that's what this is doing, but every time the wave number increases. So let's just put it down here too. And I'll just copy this. Now I don't need to increase the number of power-ups. I still need one. So I'm going to save that. And let's test it out. This should be the last part of our game. Let's see if I can do okay. So it generates the first one. Oh, you know what I want to do? Let's stop that for a second. Let's take this power up and turn this one off. I didn't actually put it into the world, into my script. That was very bad. Yeah, power up prefab, I didn't put one in. So let me prefab this power up. I got so excited. Prefabs. Oh, I did. It is prefabbed, but I just didn't put it in. So get the one that's not in the scene, but the one that's here. Boom, goes there. And let me turn the one in the hierarchy off, so we don't have it. All right, it should now create one in the world. There it is, and it's our enemies between us and them. So, oh my gosh, I'm so bad at this. Let me try it again. Oh my goodness. I'm terrible. Why don't I go the other way? Well, anyways, we saw the 2, and then the wave goes, and there's 3. And there should now be, add another, there's now 4. So it's creating one every time, which is great. All right. So it works. Our game works. The next video I'll give you will be our challenges video, and there's some interesting challenges we can do with this. So, awesome job, guys.